I want to listen to a short clip here, 2-minute clip from Adventist evangelist and pastor Mark Finley, and then I will have a question for you. So again, it's about Daniel 9:27. Let's notice here what he says.
Verse 27, then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall bring the end of the sacrifice and offering to cease. Now here's where many people get confused. They have the idea that the he that's going to confirm the covenant is the Antichrist. Let me show you why that is totally impossible, and that's an invention of the devil to destroy the veracity of this prophecy. Notice clearly, who is the main subject of verse 24? Who is going to make reconciliation for iniquity? Who is going to bring an everlasting righteousness? Who is going to seal up the covenant? Who's going to anoint the most holy? Not the Antichrist, Jesus Christ. He's the only one that can bring reconciliation for iniquity. What is the main theme of verse 25? Who is Messiah the Prince? It's Jesus Christ. Who is the main theme of verse 26? The Messiah that's going to be cut off. That's Jesus Christ. So when you come to the conclusion of the prophecy, and you have Christ the center of verse 24, Christ the center of verse 25, Christ the center of verse 26, wouldn't it be like the devil just to shift it? Second, there is no indication any place in the Bible that the Antichrist makes the covenant. Jesus Christ is the author of the eternal everlasting covenant, and he sheds his blood to confirm that covenant. Now notice what the Bible says, how precise this is. He shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. In the middle of the week, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. Who was it that brought an end to sacrifice and offering? Who was it that brought an end to all those lamb sacrifices? It was Jesus Christ.
Okay. So Sam, is Daniel 9:27 about Jesus or someone else? Is someone influenced by the devil if they disagree that Jesus is who's in focus here?
Oh, the line of what Daniel is saying here, and we note the vocabulary that he is using in Daniel 9:25 through 29 there. All of that vocabulary, it's all in 7 and it's also in 8. So again, he's not, throwing a gap way off into the kind of a future thing. He's already talked about this king that's going to come. He calls him a prince who's going to run the city. This is all language that's found, the same vocabulary words in the Aramaic. So he's talking about the visions that he's already been given in Daniel 9. He's already seen 2 visions. And so now we have an appearance of an angel who's explaining to him. He's not seeing a vision. He's listening to an angel explain to him. So these are not visions. In chapter 10, that's not a vision. He sees 2 angels, and one of them opens up the book of truth to him, and then he's hearing the words of the book of truth. But he's not seeing visions of goats and beasts and horns and animals. He's not. So there's 2 visions. There's 2 appearances. The 2 appearances are explanatory, discussing in detail the 2 visions. That's like one's a commentary on. You have the 2 appearances, explanations that are commentaries on the 2 visions. So the language between all of this is linked. The language is linked. It's the same words used here in the 2 appearances that are explaining is the same exact language word for word that is found in these 2 visions. So when I get to the end of 11 and he's talking about the king of the north and the king of the south, which I don't know of anyone that disagrees, not even the Seventh-day Adventist disagrees in their commentaries, that this is talking about the Ptolemaic kingdom, it's talking about the northern Seleucid kingdom. Not only that, it's talking about it in detail. And I don't know of anyone that disagrees with that, because it's just so apparent. And yet I'm asked to believe that after Antiochus IV shows up, king of the north, in 1120, 1125, 1127, but all of a sudden Daniel jumps way out into the future without any indication in the text whatsoever. None. When the only reason I have to assert that Daniel is jumping way into the future, and he's talking about to Christians irrelevant kings. Who cares about the Ptolemaic kingdom? Who cares about the Seleucid kingdom? Who's Antiochus? Most Christians don't know who this guy is. Why is Daniel 11 written in such detail about two kingdoms that nobody gives a rip about? Because that's what he's talking about in Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Daniel 9. The book of the truth is open. He's talking about these two irrelevant kingdoms that nobody, who cares? But Daniel cares because we don't know our history. But if you're Jewish, if you're living during this time, you're understanding what he's saying. And again, you read Maccabees and what it is, and this is a horrible, this is an abomination, this is a destruction, this is a persecution, this is bloodshed, this is not good. Nebuchadnezzar did not do this. What this king is going to do. Nebuchadnezzar, yes, he burnt the city. He took out the golden vessels. We see this in Daniel 1. Yeah, he did all that. But he's having a relationship with Daniel. This king that's going to come, he would have killed Daniel because Daniel remains covenantally faithful to God. So this king that's coming, he would have killed Daniel. He would have killed him on the spot. There's no lion's den or anything. Just chop his head off. Be done with it. Make sure I know that he's dead and hand me a head. I want to see the head of Daniel. So that's the king that we're talking about, and that's what's coming. So we look at history. We know that that's what happens. That's what comes. This is what Daniel 9 is referring to or is talking about. So what does Antiochus do? Does he kill a high priest? Yes, he has a high priest that's killed. That happens under his watch. High priests are referred to as anointed ones. You can go back to Deuteronomy, you can go back to Leviticus. They're called anointed ones. Not the anointed, but the anointed is not in this text. It's an anointed. It's a anointed one. Not the
see, that's what they try to use to say, see, it's about Jesus, because that's who's referred to as the anointed one.
Cyrus is called an anointed one, Messiah. That's what Cyrus in Isaiah 44 is clearly referred to as Messiah, not the Messiah, but he's a Messiah. Aaron and Moses are Messiahs. These are anointed ones. They're anointed priests. That's all that the term means. And so, is there a Messiah that is cut off? And yes, Onias. We read about this. Who is Onias? We have the records. They go back to Joshua, who's the priest that we know, and there's records extant that Onias is part of the Zadokite line. Who are the Zadokites? That's who David and Solomon appointed. This is the holy line of the Zadokite priesthood. This is the only legitimate priesthood that is in existence, and there is no other legitimate priesthood. Now you can see why the Dead Sea Scroll community and others are starting to say that the Caiaphas and Annas and they're not in the legitimate priest. Yeah, they're Levites, but they're not Zadokites. They're not. Why is Jesus speaking a little harshly against them? Well, who appointed them? God didn't. I know who appointed Aaron. I know who appointed Joshua, high priest Joshua. I know who appointed Phinehas. I don't know who these guys. Who's Caiaphas? He doesn't even come from the Zadokite line. Who is this guy? He's some political guy that's been installed. Then we got to go into Herod. Herod, is he of the bloodline of David? The son of David will rule. So you can see where Jesus and John the Baptist, like, none of this was legitimate, by the way. And God didn't tell you to build this Herodian temple, this monstrosity built on the back of slaves and pilfering people's money and taxation to build this great and wonderful temple that you've got here, which is going to be destroyed, by the way. But I don't want to get into that.
Yeah.
So what Daniel is saying is that the anointed will come this is going to happen. It's repeating what he's been saying all along. So he's not referring to the Messiah. And he shall make the covenant difficult to the many, which again, read Maccabees, where Antiochus made it against the law to obey the covenant. He made it against the law to circumcise children. If he circumcised your children, he had the mothers put to death in front of their children before he killed their children. This is the kind of guy we're dealing with here. So it was against the law to obey the Torah. And that's what's going on here. He caused the sacrifices and offerings to cease 2,300 days. This he did. And over in the corner abominations, he makes desolate until completion. And that which is determined is poured out. Again, the king will come to nothing. He will come without hand. No one will rescue, which is what happened to him. It's again, all of this. So the people of the prince, the one that's coming, and they will end in the flood. The holy place in the city will be ruined. That's verbatim in chapter 8. That's mentioned here in Daniel 9. But until the end, there is war, determining desolation. So the anointed one that's cut off and have nothing left of him is a high priest, which again, that's who dies under the reign of Antiochus. So all of this happens just as 8 and as 7 says that it has. Now, I say all of that, and I realize I'm going to get into a lot of hurt feelings because people think this is messianic. And Miles, you may even think that too. And great, we can have that discussion. My point is that in following consistency with what Daniel is saying here, I happen to agree with the large amount, again, of the consensus of what most scholars are saying, except the evangelical ones. They see this as messianic. And so people have accused me and said, oh, Sam doesn't believe that nope, Daniel 7, the Son of Man. That one right there. But Daniel 7 and the Son of Man does not fit in with Daniel 9 at all. It's not even mentioned. It's not even that's the thing that leaves you hanging all throughout Daniel, is that who is this Son of Man? Who is this guy? When's he coming? But all that Daniel is focused in, as he says in 7, in the vision, is I'm focused on this fourth beast and this little horn. Everything else that's going on, I'm focused on this fourth beast and this little horn. What is he going to do? Well, Daniel 8 is, I'll give you a vision. This is what he's going to trample the saints. He's going to persecute. He's going to do this. He's going to ruin the sanctuary. He's going to do all this kind of stuff. Well, when's he going to do it? 483, 62, 7s. This is going to, and that brings me to the 2nd century BC. And this king's going to do that. Well, what's going to happen after that? The books have been shut, Daniel. That's enough for you to know. Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah. And Daniel just leaves you hanging. It's the most anticlimactic, because you're reading about these kings, these Ptolemaic and northern kingdoms, and we all know who they are. And then it ends there. That's where it ends. And you're like, wait, if this is 167, there's still 167 years to get to Jesus. Go on to Jesus. Go on. Let's go. Right. And so you hear the frustration of Daniel. No, open those books back up. No, Daniel, go your way. The books have been sealed. Well, answer me this, how many days from, and then he gives them in the timeline of the 2300, 1,309 or 1,290, 1,335. That's still figuring in the 3.5 years of what goes on and he says from the abomination of desolation in 12:6, from the abominating king, and what the king does, the abominate. Well, what? Well, that's 11:27. The king that does from that. Well, we know that's Antiochus. Everybody agrees that's who that's talking about. So count from that 1,206, 1,290. Well, you're getting a little over 3 years. It's right in that period. So again, for me, ending this, there's 2 questions here. If Daniel wrote after the fact, and there's not really Daniel, then clearly we know what he's writing about, because the details are just right on the money. And that's, again, why most scholars understand that this is written after the fact, because it's just too precise. For me, if Daniel is real, and he actually wrote what he wrote, and God showed him what he showed him, then our God is predicting in detail just this little event. But what about the other nations and everything else? Does he know all? Does he know everything? He knows everything.